The Master Creator stood on the balcony of time, viewing the chaos below. He spoke, and there was light and darkness, land and sky, mountains and valleys, man and woman. This man and woman became peoples, tribes, and nations. Cultures were born, and languages emerged as they moved across this planet Earth, reaching to the large island north of Australia called Dutch New Guinea. The stage was set for the emergence of the Dunny people. Dunny legends indicate that life for them began when two men came up out of a hole in the ground. Stepping out, they sank in mud and water. They buried the stone axe which they carried, and suddenly the ground became firm. With bow and arrow they were able to survive. Later, two women appeared out of the same hole. One carried a banana shoot, and the other carried the sweet potato shoots. These they planted, and life took its natural course. The men took the women and found compatibility and companionship.
The Donny man was not aware that he represented the Western Donny tribe numbering over 150,000 speakers. Nor did he know that his tribe was the largest of over 200 tribes in Papua, which inhabited the rugged yet magnificent mountains of the island, once known as Dutch New Guinea. He was unaware of the outside world of cars and clothes, of steel axes and knives. He knew nothing of paper and pencil, of medicine and money. Coming out of the hole in the ground, the Donny people reproduced, and like ripples in the water, moved always westward. Often they were driven by their enemies. More often it was in search of more land where one could plant bigger gardens. This in turn allowed them necessary food to raise more pigs. More wives were required to care for those pigs to produce more posterity and wealth which, when used discreetly, brought a Donny man to the apex of his culture, more power and more prestige. The Donny man views his world as an overturned bowl. On the top of its dome lives a race of small dwarf-like creatures having little influence on the earth below. Underneath the dome exists a world of spirits which do influence his life, and to which he must continually fine-tune his activities and accompanying spirit ritual. His world was nearly timeless, except for the sun. The sun was his friend. In the morning, it dawned to bless his day with light, warmth, and growth. In the afternoon, it would slip behind the horizon to enter the mouth of its long tunnel underneath the earth. While the Donny slept, and the spirits of his universe played havoc in his world, the sun would move silently eastward through the tunnel to bring dawn and light to yet another day.
Loiter not on the banks of the muddy stream. Search for the pure water from the spring. From whence comes that pure spring water? My name is Otinet. I am a leader among my people, the Donny tribe, and the pastor of one of our churches. Today, I am a contented, happy man. Once fear controlled our lives, fear of revenge, killings, and war, fear of death and disease, or of our neighbor's black magic, fear of the spirits inhabiting our beautiful valleys. The gospel message brought to us by our fathers, the missionaries, changed all that. I learned about the Creator God who loves me and gave His Son so that I could again have access to eternal life. There is peace now in our valley, and there is peace and tranquility in my heart. It was not like this before the gospel came.
Fighting and warring with one another was one of the primary activities of the Dani. Normally, it was over a woman, a pig deal, or the killing of one through black magic. Such deaths had to be avenged. Then, elaborate peacemaking ceremonies would take place along with major exchange of tribal wealth.
No ba ku ye war ko krema aku ye kana yori no ra ki no ba wa ku ye ne ka ne ai no ngara ni kia buru la gara me mu me la ra na ka ki no ba ku ye ne bura ni yori na ni bo no ba ku ye ka no ra be ra ku ye sa ro ne na ba aku ye kana yori na le he ra wa no ba wan ji ne gar me yori na le koron bi ya ma ye e ga bi ya yi me ho ya buru لا كوي أبو من كل الناس هو خراب وجنب عليه كلا تعمل لا ذكري لكنه كوي وجينا لكنه كوي وجينا لكنه بلغواي كوي ما وين بيبه ومن بوار يغي وماريا يا أبو ما كلا ما نبورا عربه نبوا Uile panua nuko kangu wakilia Lakora lebe wamo kucha
My sons, I am going the way of our ancestors. However, I have a feeling that within your lifetime, strange men will come into our village. When they come, do no harm, for they bring with them a message that will change this valley.
Death was their enemy. Sitting around the still form of the deceased, the Dani vented his deep disappointment and grief that he had lost his chance to enjoy eternal life. In the beginning of time, life was good. The people were healthy and multiplied. They were unaware that a bird and a snake were racing toward them. The bird was bringing mortality, the snake immortality. The bird, being faster, reached them first. Had the snake arrived first, man would live forever. The Pidigobit bird brought death. Angrily, the Dani would pursue the bird with bow and arrow. Grieving, he would weep and wail, pulling out his hair and tossing it onto the grass roof of his house. Overcome with his feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, he would sever the knuckles from his fingers. Such was the Dani's profound grief over the death of a loved one and his longing for something better.
It was in 1960 that Esther and I first put our feet on Daniland soil here at the airstrip. At that time, we didn't know that the people often had seen the planes flying high overhead and had cried to the plains, come down, come down, come down. We want something better than we have right now. Preceding us to the field were 4 of our missionaries, UFM missionaries, but now UFM is called Crossworld. These 4 men, they were Leon Dillinger, Ralph Maynard, Dave Cole, and Bert Power, trekked in right over this mountain here and trekked on to the airstrip at Mulia, where they built the first airstrip in 1958. Now, when we arrived, of course, one of the first things we had to do was to learn language. We were surprised and smiled often because they could not pronounce our name, Scoville. We learned later that they had no S's, they had no V's, they had no final L's, so that they could not pronounce our name correctly. So we ended up being called Kobo. And Kobo it is to this very day. That's what they call us. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that there was a young man about 12 years of age. His name was Watlambuk. And he was looking over the fence which we had around the airstrip and saw us get out of the airplane. And when he got out, he looked at us and said, "I saw that man in my dream." Well, it wasn't long that we were able to communicate more freely with the people. He thought he was God's gift to us, and I guess he really was, because he helped us so dramatically in those first few months learn the language so that we could communicate with the people. We were totally astonished with the interest which we saw in the group. They would come, weapons in hand, bodies perspiring, and sit down very quietly and sincerely in a group to listen to the words of that big book. Often in the afternoon, the big men would come and ask us questions about what we had given them in the teaching. And then several months later, we were surprised when we saw a group of these big men come into the yard, sit down, and call us out to talk with them. When we sat down with them, they lifted up their bows and arrows, and they pointed to the fetishes in their net bags, and they said, "We can no longer listen to the words from God that you give us from that big book and continue to worship the spirits of these fetishes. Therefore, we as a people have decided to burn them this coming Sunday when we gather to worship." And sure enough, overruling our reluctance, they came that Sunday and piled on a pile of firewood all that they had trusted in for centuries. These were their gods, which they actually burned and rid themselves of so they could listen and hear the words of God. It was the most moving experience that I've ever had in missions.
One man, a very charismatic community leader, stood on the edge of that pyre already loaded with fetishes. Dramatically, he began stripping himself of all his paraphernalia, his bow and arrows, the headdress on his head, the pig's tusk in his nose, the pretty colored leaves and feathers in his armbands, his special fetishes, all stripped from his body and tossed on the pile. Then, in a moment of rare grandeur, he held up a long bone dagger. "My fathers and my mothers, my brothers and my sisters, I've killed over one man's fingers with this bone dagger. Today I'm burning it and taking eternal life." And he flipped it onto the pile of firewood, then spat on those things he had placed on the pile. The change was dramatic. Happiness replaced fear. Pig grease and filth were washed away in new bathing routines. The men cut one another's hair full of filth and lice. Better houses were constructed and fences built to keep the pigs with their feces and filth outside the village. Relationships between husband and wife deepened, with love which could now be expressed. The value of the woman changed most dramatically. She was no longer called the friend of the pig. Enemies were reconciled. There was peace now in the valley. Enthusiastic men gathered to learn the Bible stories, then trekked to faraway